Today, we're exploring the physical architecture of memory, like how our brains literally build the past, one connection at a time.
So, have you ever wondered about that? How a fleeting experience, a scent, a sound, even just a random fact, becomes a lasting part of you? We tend to think of memories as these abstract files, kind of floating around in our mind. But the truth? It's way more physical and honestly, way more fascinating.
See, it's not some kind of magic. It's totally physical. Every single time you form a long-term memory, your brain is actually physically changing. The connections between your neurons are literally being reshaped and beefed up.
Okay, so to really get how this physical change happens, we've got to look at this fundamental process that's right at the heart of all learning and memory. It's a mechanism scientists call potentiation.
Right, and this process is called long-term potentiation, or LTP for short. The best way to think about it is like that use it or lose it principle, but for your brain cells. So when two neurons talk to each other over and over, the connection between them physically gets stronger. I love this analogy. It's just like a path in a forest. The more you walk on it, the wider and easier it gets to travel.
But that brings up a really big question, right? When you strengthen one of those paths, does that just affect that one little trail, or does it actually send ripples through the entire forest, the whole network? Well, to answer that, we've got to look at this really fascinating study that zoomed out to see the big picture. They wanted to see how a single learning event, echoed across the whole brain. And the way they did this is just so clever. Researchers stimulated one single, very specific neural highway on one side of a mouse's brain. Then, and this is the cool part, they put these tiny little recording devices in really distant areas, even all the way over in the opposite hemisphere, just to listen for those echoes. And the result was, pretty astonishing. The strengthening effect from that one pathway, it wasn't isolated. It didn't just stay put. It spread.
And this chart just shows it perfectly. So what they did was measure the strength of a connection way, way far away from where they zapped it. A connection that wasn't directly touched at all. And look at that. Its strength more than doubled. That is just wild. It's like paving a single road in one town and finding out it somehow made a highway on the other side of the country stronger.
So the big takeaway here is absolutely massive. A single learning event isn't just about strengthening one tiny connection, it's about reinforcing an entire, interconnected, brain-wide circuit. Okay, but that brings us to the next huge question, doesn't it? We see this big, large-scale ripple effect, but what's actually happening down at the microscopic level? How does that very first connection, that first little paving stone get put down in the first place?
All right, to answer that, we have to zoom in. And I mean, way in. We're going to go from the scale of these huge brain circuits all the way down to a single, tiny, microscopic part of just one neuron.
So let me introduce you to the hero of our microscopic story, the dendritic spine. These things are these super tiny little protrusions. Think of them like microscopic antennas or listening posts on a neuron. This is the actual physical spot where connections are made.
And what's really neat is that these spines come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes. You got thin ones, stubby ones, and some that are big and kind of mushroom-shaped. All this variety made researchers ask a really basic but super important question. Does a spine's shape actually matter for learning?
Well, to find out, scientists built these incredibly sophisticated computer models to simulate exactly what happens inside all these different shapes during a learning event. And the answer they got? A huge, resounding yes.
It really turns out that when you get down to this tiny scale, geometry is destiny. The actual physical shape of the spine, it's everything. It directly dictates how strong that connection, and by extension that memory, can become.
So how does this work? Well, it's basically a three-step process. First off, those big mushroom-shaped spines, they just have more room inside compared to their surface area. Second, because of that shape, when a signal comes in, they can pull in and hold on to way more calcium ions. And calcium is the key messenger for strengthening these connections. And finally, step 3. More calcium kicks off a much more powerful chemical reaction, which leads directly to a stronger synapse. Simple as that.
And get this, the relationship they found was not subtle at all. I mean, look at this number. The synaptic weight, which is basically the strength of the memory, was directly and incredibly powerfully tied to the spine's shape. Those bigger spines, with their special geometry, could create a response that was just exponentially stronger. That is the power of architecture, but on a totally microscopic scale.
So, the bottom line is this. A spine's physical structure isn't just some random container. No, it's a tiny little machine that's optimized for learning. These bigger, well-formed spines are physically built to forge stronger, more stable memories.
Okay, so let's zoom back out and tie all of this together. We're going to connect these two incredible stories, from the tiny microscopic spine all the way back up to that huge brain-wide network. You know, just like the researchers from that first study said, memories aren't these little isolated islands. They're stored and consolidated in these wide, sprawling neural networks that cover the brain. And now we can finally see exactly how that happens. That incredible brain-wide ripple effect we saw earlier, it's powered by this microscopic process happening trillions of times over. Countless tiny individual dendritic spines are physically changing their shape to grab more calcium, and by doing that, they all work together to strengthen an entire neural circuit. The big picture is literally built from the tiny details.
So this leaves us with a pretty profound thought. If learning and memory are acts of physical change, of literally growing and shaping these tiny structures, then every experience, every new thing you learn is reshaping the physical substance of your brain. So think about it. Are we constantly sculpting who we are?